Hey everyone, it's Andrew Klavan with this week's interview with Ryan Girdusky. I've been watching the stuff, I guess we're all watching the stuff that's happening in Europe, where the left is using every means possible to stop the nationalists and populists from rising, the new right from rising. In France, they just banned Marine Le Pen from running for president, which is amazing, on completely spurious charges as far as I was concerned. In Romania, they overturned an election. Israel, the courts have so much power, they can't pry them loose. In Spain, they're arresting people for speaking. It's not even to mention Britain, where you can get arrested for praying in your home silently. And if you think we're not threatened with that here, you're not watching what the courts are trying to do to Donald Trump as they put injunctions on small local cases. They put injunctions on policies across the country. Ryan Girdusky is the host of the podcast A Numbers Game on iHeartRadio. He's the author of the National Populist newsletter on Substack, and also the author with Harlan Hill of They're Not Listening, How the Elites Created the Nationalist Populist Revolution. Ryan, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So let's begin by defining what we're talking about. When you talk about nationalist populism, I mean, that seems to be the target of the left across all of Europe and in America. What exactly is that? What defines that?
Yeah, I define more nationalism as the conflict between internationalism or neoliberalism, globalism, and more patriotism, nationalism, of more focus inwards on when it things like trade or immigration. And then populism is a class conflict between the working class and those who are, I would say, maybe the upper class. But when I say the upper class, really, it's a conflict between those who could live anywhere and those who live somewhere, those who are rooted in place, and then those who might have a place in New York, a place in London, a place in, wherever they go, Dubai, wherever they could possibly be in the world, and they'd have those places, those people are interchangeable. They kind of see no differences in nationhood. And so the conflict of vision is that difference between those who believe that your nation is important and it's special and it's worth preserving, as is your culture, and the people that live there, and those who don't.
So it's more likely for elites to be against nationalist populism because they're more mobile, because they have more money. Is that basically it?
Yeah, and they've had a very good run in the last 30, 40 years of neoliberal policies. It really didn't matter to them that we got into manufacturing to move it to China. It didn't matter to them their kids didn't serve in wars in the Middle East. They got cheap nannies and maids from mass immigration, and they still live in communities that look like the 1950s demographically. They've been allowed to isolate themselves from any kind of massive changes that have occurred from neoliberal policies. And that really does explain the difference between how the Republican Party has altered its real policies from the top up, from the top down, rather, from Donald Trump, and those of Hillary Clinton or Kamala Harris or Joe Biden's.
So, I mean, one of the things that always has stunned me in Britain, I lived in Britain for many years, and one of the things that stuns me is the wash of migrants and immigrants being allowed in, and the fact that the people keep voting people out of office, trying to get them to stop, and that nobody listens to them. And we had this here for 4 years of the Joe Biden administration, where we had this, to say invasion is really not hyperbole. We just had these people marching across our borders while the Biden administration lied repeatedly, saying the borders are secure. It was basically, we were just not supposed to look at it. It was all fine. They made fun of Trump for saying that cats were being eaten by immigrants. But what difference does it make whether cats were being eaten or not when you have a town of 20,000 people and you bring in 10,000 immigrants? Is going to change everything. Why aren't they listening? Why is it important to them to let people come pouring in like that?
Well, that is really literally the biggest conflict between those. Immigration is the center conflict between those who are globalists and those who are nationalists. Basically, the essential idea is that to globalists, America, Europe, they have magic dirt. The minute you get there, you could be interchangeable with all the other natives who have lived here for generations, if not, 300 years, in parts of Europe, 1,000 years. And they don't believe in the specialty of culture and of people. I mean, if you look at all the advances of the entire world, all the freedoms, all the maximalized enterprise, everything that could possibly, all the riches you want from all the world, you're really talking about just a handful of countries and a handful of people that are very important, that are very special. Not to say other people aren't special or are important, but they are different. And to realize the difference matters quite a bit. In America, you mentioned Joe Biden. You can go back 20 years. When the Gallup poll came out back in 2001, a supermajority of Americans wanted massive lower levels of legal and no illegal immigration right after the 9/11 attacks. And George W. Bush kicked open the floodgates and then tried to pass amnesty. And what the most amazing thing is that they refuse to sit there and stop pushing pedal to the metal on mass immigration and then keep wondering why the public has this knee-jerk reaction against it and movements towards national populism. That was the thing behind Brexit, as you mentioned, with England. Why don't they do it? Is because they're really married to this neoliberal idea that they could have a very rich welfare in England, in Europe anyway, a very rich welfare state, a servant class that does most of the work, a Chinese Communist Party that does most of the manufacturing, and the American military that protects them. And then the wealthy can have their own very special privileged lives in beautiful parts of Europe, while the working class really do suffer immensely in parts of the UK and Northern England for sure. And in many parts of Europe, you see this. A lot of Europe are very poor countries attached to very rich capitals, and that is the only thing that keeps parts of them afloat. And it's done by design. I spoke to one of my friends who's a British pollster. I said, "What is an industry outside finance that England has anymore?" They're just about to close the last steel mill in England after 150 years of continual steel production in the nation. The nation that had a massive steel enterprise. And they're closing it. And I just realized afterwards that the steel company was owned by the CCP, by a CCP associated business. So they had already sold out their steel industry to China. There's a tremendous sense of that they don't need to create, and they've kind of exhausted themselves, and they're letting the other parts of the world kind of run the next century. It's horrifying when you think of it. And it also speaks greatly to the idea that people take things for granted. They assume that even if you don't do the work to preserve great institutions, great nations, great people, that they will be there for the next generation, when that is not true. Great freedoms, that is just not the truth. The constant need for preservation and work has to be done. And they just have never seen it like that. And it's going to be very, very difficult if they don't start backpedaling very, very soon. In most parts, it's already too late in some parts of the world. Like, the birth rate is so low in parts like Italy or Greece that the next generation is 50% smaller than the previous one. So, but still, work can be done to revive it, to redeem it, but it's in bad shape.
So, I always want to split Europe and America apart a little bit, in the sense that America is a country of immigrants. That may just be a slogan, but it also has truth to it. We've always been a mixed lot. We come from, obviously mostly from Europe, but there were always blacks here. There were always Chinese brought in to do work. There were always people coming in. That wasn't true in most of Europe. I mean, when I lived in Britain, it was the 90s, and it must have been 95% British, and now it's far, far less than that. And what I wonder is, aren't they courting revolution? I mean, at some point, the people who are willing to speak racially, aren't they going to rise up and just say, get rid of these people? They're passing laws that say a white man can be sentenced to more years in prison for the same crime than a black person or a woman. Aren't they courting violence?
And that was the Conservative Party government that got that law into effect. It was by nominating a judicial council that's out there to do it. I think that when it comes to, look at the nations of Europe, though. They're mostly disarmed people. We have a universal, a state where your phone is what investigates you. Everyone has a data trail, basically everybody. And you're not free to really think. You're not free to post anything on social media. You're not free to have conversations that you could be arrested for. And they do have two-tier policing, is what it's called in the United Kingdom, where white native Britons are under a different level of scrutiny than non-Brits. And although they all claim they're British, but they're non-Brits. There's the grooming gang scandal in England is horrifying. There were girls who were dozens and dozens of times, little girls, by Pakistani men mostly, and those men were still allowed to sponsor people to legally come there. Their populations grew in size, and those girls were ignored. Many committed suicide. Many had massive addiction problems because of it. Fathers who were outraged were put in prison for it. That is, they are trying to defeat their own people in every which way. And the Conservative Party never spoke up for those people, certainly not under Boris Johnson or David Cameron and Kemi is a joke, the leader currently of the Conservative Party. She's never going to do anything. So there is a dear lack of leadership, which is why for the first time in a century, or maybe not a century, maybe 2 millennia, that you have a third British party really coming about that is not Labour, not Tory, that has a serious chance, which is Nigel Farage's, Reform Party. But even in places that have lots of immigrants and long histories of immigration, like you mentioned, the United States, a supermajority of Americans in the United States could date their root back, or majority, not supermajority, but a majority of Americans could date their ancestry back to the American Revolution as recently as 1990. The mass explosion in immigration, I remember from 1920 to 1965, we had virtually no immigration. Immigration as a whole went decline because we had 40 years of assimilation. What led to part of the reason I would say that Donald Trump was able to succeed in 2016 and Pat Buchanan was not in 1996, that 20-year period, was when we saw massive explosions in both illegal and legal immigration. And people became very aware of what happens. I bring this up constantly to people when I talk to different Jewish groups, especially liberal Jewish groups. I say to them all the time, we talk about what's happening on college campuses, but because of our legal immigration, we are going to have more Muslims in swing states in America than we will have Jews within the next 10 years. The next 10 years, that will happen. And in order to win a state like Michigan or Georgia, even, you are going to have to court people who are more sympathetic to people who have a negative opinion of Israel. That bothers me a great deal as someone who supports the nation of Israel. I don't want that kind of a future. But that was what is going to come because of our legal immigration system. And that is what has happened throughout all of Europe with their legal immigration system. The largest new parties that were arising in England in the last election in 2024 were pro-Islam parties in Northern England, in towns that were in the 90s, as you said, when you were there, 90% working class blokes who, fighting for decent labor rights. It is horrifying what is happening, and they are pedal to the metal because they believe it is still a good thing. And in fact, Tony Blair radically increased immigration. And when they asked one of his aides why he did so, they said to rub the working class's noses in diversity. That was they really do not like these people. They genuinely don't like these working class people, and they really want them to suffer.
It just seems so short-sighted to me because I don't know if you've read the novel Submission by Michelle Houellebecq, which basically it's a great novel. I think it's a terrific novel. And I mean, that does seem to be ultimately the people bringing these people in are going to run out of space, right? They're going to run out of Monacos where they can retreat to and find themselves just as oppressed as the working class. So I'm watching what's happening in France, and I find this horrifying. I find whatever anybody thinks of Marine Le Pen, she is a legitimate candidate. And I think she's actually purified her party of some of the anti-Semitism of the past. And they always link her to it, but she seems to be, a French woman fighting for France, which I think is just entirely fair. And the charges brought against her were not as bad as the charges brought against Trump in New York, but they were pretty bad. I mean, she was accused of extorting, of taking money which had been given to her for her workers, which she gave to the work. She used it for what it was supposed to be used for. And now she's banned from running. Is there any chance that there's going to be blowback about that? I mean, when you say these people are disarmed, you're right. But is there any chance that people take to the street? I mean, the French will take to the streets if you tell them they have to retire at 65 instead of 67 instead of 65. Are they not going to riot over this at all?
Right. No, that's very, very true. The French work ethic right now. The thing about Marine Le Pen is the daughter of Jean-Marie Le Pen, who just passed away. He was a very controversial French politician. Many viewed him as racist and anti-Semitic and homophobic. And he passed the mantle to his daughter. I think in 2007 was the first year she ran for president, or 2012, rather 2012. And she immediately detoxified the party. She really pushed away a lot of people with very extreme views, moderated it. And her percentages in every presidential election went from 17% to 33% to 41%. And in her most recent polls, France is a two-tier presidential system where you run the first round and then you run the second round. In the first round, and this time, she was at 40%. So to get to 50 is not very, very difficult. And she was in a very good chance to be the next president of France, which would have altered not just France, but the entire European Union, because France is one of the two essential nations in the European Union aside from Germany. Well, the charges of embezzlement, which is what she faced, was, I mean, when you think of the term embezzlement, you think someone's taking money that they shouldn't have and enriching themselves. What she was doing, what they found her guilty of, is that she was paying her workers who were working on both her presidential campaign and her job in the European Parliament. They were doing two jobs, and that basically she was using one fund to pay for them for both. That is the alleged charge. A lot of politicians in Europe do this. This is not a completely unknown thing. It's not like this has never happened before. And also the money, the 5 million euro, which is what they spent, 5 million over 12 years, which is a very insignificant amount of money in overall spending for AIDS and stuff like that, was for the betterment of her party. So her charges were ludicrous, and the sentencing was at the discretion of the judge. The judge didn't have a minimum mandate he had to give her. He chose to say you cannot run. Not only that, she has 2 years. She's not allowed. She's 2 years in her home. She has to stay in her home for 2 years. She's under house arrest. Why? She's not a flight risk. What's she going to do? Like go rob a car? It's absurd how they punish the entire leadership of the National Rally, which is her political party. But some of them are mayors of towns, and they said, oh, you can still be mayor, but you're under house arrest. You're under house arrest as mayor. How are you really a threat? It made no sense, these charges. It was just to sit there and slap down the largest conservative and nationalist and populist party in all of France. She does have an heir to her political party. That is her niece's boyfriend. Jordan Bardella is his name. He will likely run in her place. He's only 29 years old, which is a big strike against him. He's the leader of their group in parliament. He's basically as popular as she is, though he is very young. I made the joke that the last time a young Frenchman with an Italian ancestry ran for president of France, ran for leader of France, it was Napoleon. So we'll see if this one works out.
So when I see this stuff, I find it absolutely horrifying. And I listened to J.D. Vance's Munich speech, and I thought it was great. I thought it was a great speech. And when I talk to conservatives about this, a lot of times they say, well, no, we have to keep our ties to Europe, if only because the territory protects us. But I don't understand how Europe is. I thought Vance was right. I don't understand why we should be in NATO with countries that arrest people for praying silently in their homes, which they actually threatened to do in Scotland, and they have arrested people for praying silently outside of abortion clinics in England. Is this in fact a problem for America, like that we have to have our allies because we're going to be battling with Russia and China and Iran, but we're now supporting people who don't share our values anymore?
Right. I mean, their values have changed, and that's the thing. Marine Le Pen was the third leader of a major political party in the European Union, in NATO rather, to be kicked off the ballot. I mean, Turkey and then Romania and then Marine Le Pen over in France. And I think the dichotomy couldn't be clearer when it comes to people like Giorgia Meloni, the prime minister of Italy, who is very much about, she left the Belt and Road Initiative. She views America as an ally. She wants Italy and the European Union to go closer with the United States. And you have basically Italy and, the former leader of Poland was the same way, but he's not there anymore. You have Italy and a few other leaders saying we need to get closer to the United States. We need to work with them. She actually opposed having retaliatory tariffs from Italy to the United States. She's really been sitting there and saying we need to have a Western alliance of Western countries, but she's really swimming upstream right now on the continent. Mm-hmm. I don't know how you manage without some kind of organizational ability with the European Union They have not kept up their end of the deal when it comes to defense, when it comes to a lot of other issues like trade. They have a lot of their nations have sold out to the Chinese Communist Party. A lot of them have sold to Russia, by the way. They're almost all dependent on Russian oil. So, and they refuse to innovate. They have this Green New Deal energy policy, which is destroying their economies. And they have an immigration policy, which is changing the demographics of their nations so that they will be less sympathetic with the West, more sympathetic with hostile African or North African or Middle Eastern countries. I think this is a long-term issue that they have not thought the ramifications through. I don't think Angela Merkel did. I don't think that that Tony Blair did. I don't think that any of these people did about what happens because you can only silence people for so long. And what JD Vance was really saying that was so important was that there are in Europe, you are seeing these multi-field parties and these political parties. There's like 6 or 7 in some of these countries. You have the nationalist populist people coming in second or first and not allowed to work in the government. They're still being isolated by the centrist parties. So in Germany, which happened this year, the AfD, which is a controversial party, but it came in second. It is a conservative party. The center-right Christian Democratic Union came in first. And the Christian Democratic Union is now working with the socialists to form a government and is isolating 20% of the voters who are very right-wing and have the same concerns as their voters. And now they have to increase immigration. They have to reduce the wait time for citizenship. They have a Green New Deal policy. It's all the same old thing. What's going to happen is, as what's going to result in all this, is that they're just going to have more people turn to nationalist populism as the answer. And that's what I wrote my book about. In the book was constantly like the people who hated Trump, the Hillary Clintons, the George Bushes, the Barack Obamas, are the ones who created the conditions that led to the rise of him. So if you really are a liberal or a neoliberal and you want globalism to succeed, well, then you have to back down on certain of your beliefs that are not working for your people.
Listen, when I do this podcast, I'm an open book. But at home, I value my privacy because I'm not wearing any clothes. There's nothing worse than realizing your neighbors can see right into your living room while you're doing a pagan dance in your underwear. Right? They can see right in because your old blinds don't quite do the job anymore. After all, it's 2025 and your blinds might be still from 2005. That's why I'm excited about 3-Day Blinds. They're the leading manufacturer of custom window treatments in the U.S., and they make the whole process ridiculously easy. You can do all the shopping right from the comfort of your home. And right now, if you use my URL, 3dayblinds.com/Klavan, they are running a buy one, get one 50% off deal. Their design consultants have over 10 years of experience and come right to your home with thousands of samples. No more guessing what your blinds will look like. And the best part, they handle everything: design, measuring, installation. Plus, they can even set you up with smart blinds that connect to your home automation system. After helping over 2 million people get their dream window treatments in the past 45 years, they definitely know what they're doing. Right now, get quality window treatments that fit your budget with 3-Day Blinds. Head to 3dayblinds.com/Klavan for their buy one, get one 50% off deal on custom blinds, shades, shutters, and drapery. For a free, no charge, no obligation consultation, just head to 3dayblinds.com/Klavan. That's buy one, get one 50% off when you head to the number 3, DAY, blinds.com/ how do you spell it? KLAVAN. We're talking to Ryan Girdusky. He's the host of the podcast A Numbers Game on iHeartRadio and the author of the National Populist newsletter on Substack. The book he was talking about is They're Not Listening, How the Elites Created the Nationalist Populist Revolution, which he wrote with Harlan Hill. Ryan, let's move to America here. I'm watching, it's comic almost in its mordant way. I'm watching courts say not only that we shouldn't be expelling illegal aliens who are also gangsters, but if we did expel them, we should bring them back. And that to me is like, should be a punchline, but it's not. I mean, it's actually what people are saying and what the Democrat Party is saying. So they haven't let go of this vision they have of basically erasing America, erasing a country. Is this something that you feel we have a better chance of stopping here than they did in Europe? And what do you recommend? How do we go forward?
We have a million times better chance in America because we don't have the European Union. The European Union is the most anti-democratic organization in the world. And basically all the countries in the, not in the world, but in the Western Hemisphere for sure, all of these countries have very little ability to deport their own illegals. I mean, because they have something called the ECHR, the European Council on Human Rights, and European Commission on Human Rights, which forbids you to deport somebody to a country that they considered dangerous. So it doesn't matter if you're from Afghanistan, they can't send you back to Afghanistan because it's too dangerous for the. In America, we don't have the same situation, thankfully. These judges that are doing these nationwide injunctions, I mean, it was an act of brilliance, I thought, by Stephen Miller for saying, hey, the flight's already in Venezuela. You have no jurisdiction. Sorry. I thought that was absolutely brilliant. And this is what left-wing NGOs have been trained to do. They district shop. They go to the most liberal judges that they know, either in San Francisco or wherever, or DC, and they file suits there because they know they have favorable judges. And by the time that this court case will get heard by the Supreme Court or a higher district court, or a higher, rather, appellate court, months and if not years go by. This is what they did in the first Trump term constantly. Remember Trump v. Hawaii, which was the Muslim ban, which wasn't a Muslim ban, but it was the ban on certain populations. That took well over a year to get regulated, and it was following normal precedent that the president of the United States has in the textbook of the law, the ability to deny entry to any alien or class of aliens he doesn't seem beneficial to the United States. It's literally in our law. It's been done a million times throughout our history, and yet it took over a year for Donald Trump to actually carry that out. That's what they're hoping to do, just tie it up in the courts long enough, ride it out for 4 years, get nationwide injunctions so he can't carry out his policy. And I mean, I don't want to see, we have co-equal branches of government, which means something. They're not more superior than the executive branch. And I think that, if they're worried about the ability of the judiciary or the respect of the judiciary has to respect their role. I mean, it's not to sit there and to act as a voice for the NGOs who seek to sit there and import millions of people in this country and to do all these left-wing ideas. I mean, that's really what they kind of act as, and it's horrifying. And I'm sorry, you cannot have a district court judge from one area of the country, like San Francisco, making rulings for the entire country. It's insane.
This worries me because, as you say, they're co-equal branches of government. Jefferson felt that they should work this out sort of among themselves, these kind of questions out among themselves. But the prospect of the president, even this president, saying, I'm going to ignore the judge is frightening. It is a constitutional crisis, which, of course, the left has been calling everything he does a constitutional crisis. But that's an actual constitutional crisis, and it won't be his fault. I mean, it'll be the judge's fault. What do you think the path is for the right in America? What do you think we should be thinking about working on?
I mean, the right for a very, very smart way over the last several decades has been working on building their own institutions in the media, in legal ways, in ability to sit there and get people inside the federal government. That's all matters, and that's what we've been working on little by little. I think that is very, very important. I think that we have to continue to do that. And, there should be a way where federal judges, if they do nationwide injunctions, there has to be an immediate, case hearing within a very short period of time by a larger appellate court or the Supreme Court, so that way they can't have these massive holds forever and ever. I mean, it's lawfare. The left had lawfare against Trump as a person, and now they're doing it as a president, and that's all it is. And if they do it for too much, people will just not trust the judiciary at all.
Yeah. My last question, I'm out of time, but I want to ask you a kind of an offbeat question because it does bother me. There is a terrible strain of anti-Semitism, which permeates the left as far as I'm concerned, but it's now rising on the right as well. And it includes the old idea that the Jews are internationalists, that they have no loyalty, that their first loyalty is always to Israel or to Judaism or whatever. And then you have, of course, George Soros, who basically stepped out of a Hitler handbook. He's actually like the cliche of an anti-Semitic idea. And I'm wondering if this is a danger. I know people look at J.D. Vance, and sometimes they don't trust him, and they're thinking, what is his real agenda and all this stuff? Is this a problem, and is this something that Jews need to address, and that those of us who don't hate Jews need to address?
I think that, and I've said this, I have a very good Jewish journalist friend, and he was asking me, I worked for JD Vance, and he asked me, all these questions about JD's feelings on Israel. And I said, I've never spoken to him about Israel one time. And he's like, really? And I said, no, I don't. I said, I'm not Jewish, but I'm also not anti-Semitic. So I don't spend a ton of my life thinking about Israel. I treat it like a normal country, an ally, but a normal country. And I just happen to know enough poor Jews where I know they don't control everything. So one of my Jewish friends who's a comedian goes, if we control everything, Hanukkah will be a much bigger deal than it is. So so I just think that treating people, I think the biggest problem is a lot of left-wingers who run things like the ADL, who are Jewish, who give a bad name to normal, conservative, patriotic American Jews, are really the problem for it. But I think that treating people normally and with respect eventually will whittle its way down. I think when you put people on pedestals and everyone tries to find someone to blame, it makes it harder. And I think that Jews, Israelis especially, are suffering from the same kind of thing that a lot of white people in America have been with, which is they call them colonizers. And they say, you're a colonizer, you have privilege, you have supremacy, yada, yada, yada. It's a very dark mentality of the left, and some people on the right unfortunately believe it, but it's not true, and it's part of the left-wing ideology that runs parts of campuses in this country. That's horrible.
Yeah, it's tough. Ryan Girdusky, once again, he's the host of the podcast A Numbers Game on iHeartRadio, the author of the National Populist newsletter on Substack, and the book is They're Not Listening, How the Elites Created the Nationalist Populist Revolution with Harlan Hill. Ryan, it's really good talking to you. Very interesting conversation. I appreciate it. I hope you'll come back again.
Absolutely.
Really interesting conversation, really pivotal moment. I think a pivotal moment in America. And hopefully, if we win our fight here, it will have ramifications in Europe as well. That's Ryan Girdusky. Once again, he is the host of the podcast A Numbers Game, the author of the National Populist newsletter on Substack. And I am Andrew Klavan, and I will be back on Friday with the Andrew Klavan Show. I hope you'll be there.